Auroville is just part of the talk. The second part, which we're just going to touch upon this evening because of shortage of time, is we're going to touch upon duplicating, first seeing, evaluating maybe if this is a good idea to duplicate, and then duplicating this idea in the Western Cape, in South Africa, and possibly around the world. And it's something I've been working on for 5 of those 15 years, is studying communities as a broad subject, Auroville is a specific subject, but looking at other communities, intentional communities, particularly successful ones that haven't failed. Similar to rocket companies, a lot of communities do fail. And we built a team in Auroville under a project called CEDAR, which is actually a research team. One hat of mine is as an academic. I work as an Indologist and a philologist with languages, with Sanskrit particularly. And the other hat is obviously being part of this community, part of the community. So I'm going to start with a very basic story. I'm just going to jump to the first slide. So this is the title. It's about Auroville and then a solution. Communities as a solution, basically. Is it a better way to live? And can I offer something to the world? Thank you so much. Yeah. So I actually started off in 1945. My father, ironically, and my whole childhood I heard his stories of World War II. He was in the first kibbutz. I gather most of you know what a kibbutz is. It comes from the Hebrew word kibbush, which means to gather together or to come together. And the kibbutzes started around 1910. And he happened to spend time in the first kibbutz, and I kept having this word growing up, kibbutz, kibbutz, and he spoke very fondly of it. So it always sat there in my consciousness, and I knew it was something I wanted to explore. So when I was 19, I went and I volunteered for a month on a kibbutz, which extended to a year, and I actually became a member of the kibbutz. So I got to, even though I was very young and wet behind the ears, I actually got to live in a functioning, vibrant, thriving community. The kibbutz I lived in was in the north of Israel, and it was a very formative experience because 2 very strong observations happened, is that the young and the elderly were the happiest I'd ever seen anywhere in my life at that stage, in those 19 years, and that meant a lot to me. I felt very safe, I felt protected, and I felt that money was no longer the overarching power of life there. There was something else, which was this coming togetherness, which is the kibbutz idea. And kibbutz was actually a whole movement. In our 5-year studies of communities, we worked with, there's an institute in Haifa that actually studies kibbutzim. Kibbutzim is the plural of kibbutz, you can't say kibbutzes. And Israel actually at one point had 3.3% of the population. It's around 2% or 1.5 to 2% now. It has declined as Israel's become more capitalistically orientated and this kind of collective idea. And there were other reasons why. Once it declined, it's gone through a transformation where the pure kibbutzes that were operating very much cooperatively, they changed into something else. And now, ironically, in the COVID year and a half, they've actually been going back to what they were because people were realizing they actually need more community and more unity. But Israel had, you can see this map, each dot is a kibbutz on the map. So they didn't just have one community, they actually had almost 300, and then they had moshavim. So there was hundreds of interlinked communities that all collaborated. So obviously if you have many communities, it's going to be much easier than having one. And even today, 40% of the farming is done in kibbutzes, in kibbutzim in Israel. And about 20% of the kibbutzim are still communal, and that's actually growing at the moment. I'm not going to focus on this, is another topic completely, but I lived in a kibbutz, it's just part of my story. And then in 1999 I went to live in a community in Italy called Ananda, which was formed based on the ideas of Paramhansa Yogananda. He had this idea called World Brotherhood Colonies, really gathering people together, like a kibbutz. And there was a stronger, you could say, meditative aspect there. It was more spiritually orientated. And it was a good experience. And after that I did a survey of other communities, and I visited a number of them, but this was the Yogananda idea. He wrote about it in 1946, it's called World Brotherhood Colonies. You can read about it if you haven't heard of that. He said get 50 families together and just collect your money together for a year. This was the basis of his idea. Pool your money for a year, you know what, you have surplus, and then go out, buy land, make schools, and do exactly what we've done in the last 53 years, and I'm going to show you what we've done. I spent quite a lot of my life traveling and living in I've lived in a lot of big cities like London and San Francisco, so I got to see what's out there in terms of where one could live and live one's life and be useful to the world. And I'll explain to you why I chose Auroville as my base and to live in a community that will come along. And then one of the other communities I lived in, it wasn't a formal community, it was an informal community. It was a medieval village in Nepal that hadn't changed for about 1,000 years. And they were still living very agrarianly, people were still very close to nature, and people still lived communally, and there was an intense amount of collaboration. And this was very informal. It was just actually a city in Nepal, but they just still had that because we used to be communal when we couldn't just get on planes and move around so easily. We were restrained, and also by agriculture. We had to live with the cycles of agriculture. So this was another formative experience in what I'm coming to, which is to talk about Auroville. In 2007, I arrived in Auroville, and I was traveling around India. I'd been studying Ayurveda since '99, and from Ayurveda, I went to India. I wanted to study it at its source, and I kept hearing this word Auroville coming up. I didn't read any books about it, I didn't know much about it. And I was in Tiruvannamalai, which is the place of the Saint Ramana Maharshi. Some of you might know quite a bit about him. Even though he was mostly in silence most of his life, he did speak occasionally, and he was a formidable saint. And I was there, and people that's about an hour and a half from Auroville, and everyone was talking about Auroville. So I was with my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife, and we said, let's just go there. So we went to Auroville, and this was our first view. This is called the Visitor Center. Now this building is built of earth bricks that are made in Auroville, so it's already quite unusual. And the first thing we saw was the water. The water was dynamized water, where they were trying to activate, and like the work of Immortal, they were trying to make the water of a higher healing potency so that it would actually benefit you much more. So that was the first things I saw, and that was like my first impression. And I went to live in this community. Now Auroville has 130 communities inside of the macro. So there is this broader community of about 3,000 people, and inside we have 130 settlements. I live in one of those 130. So we ended up here. They asked me to teach cooking. It was a very sort of basic one, but it was a little community within a community. So we got to see a small-scale community of, say, 20 people, which is something that we could do in South Africa. We could, say, go to Cape Point or to Stellenbosch or out of Cape Town and do these smaller communities. Auroville, remember, is 3,000 people from 58 countries. And my first job was cleaning compost toilets. So it was quite humbling. I was given this house in exchange for cooking, and that is the room where all the compost fell under the toilet. And the deal was I had to clean out all the compost. So it was a super humbling work. And my second job, even though I had qualifications in computer science and very elevated things, I had to clean compost toilets. It was my first job. But I look back on it very fondly because it wasn't a very pleasant moment to clean compost toilets. I don't know if any of you have done that. But it kind of broke down this I-ness that often predominates in life. And my second job was cooking for 2,500 people. That's our solar kitchen. We cook on sunlight. And they asked me to help, and so it was volunteering there. And then, of course, I went on to find my way and other works. This is what Auroville looks like from the sky. This is right the midpoint. We say the Brahmastan, the central point. In India, they believe everything is laid out like your body. So this would be the umbilicus, the belly button, basically, of the community, the center. And that's one of our parts. I'll tell you about that. And we're in southeast India. So our biggest city, big city, and that's a huge city, is Chennai. It's 2 hours away. And we've got a lovely small little provincial capital called Pondicherry, which is 12 kilometers. And it's really nice not being too far away from a city, because sometimes you want to be like a month in the forest and sort of cut off, and then you just want to go to a mall or to a cinema. And of course we do have our own cinemas, but you just want a bit of urban life. And Pondicherry was a French colony, so it's actually very beautiful, it's very historic, and it's also very yogic. It had many saints living there. So there was, of course, Sri Aurobindo, who was having his ashram, and his samadhi, where he's buried, is there. And I like the fact that we're not too isolated. Often I've been counseling groups, and they want to make a very remote, isolated community, and that I call a retreat, not a community. If it's a community, it should have some link to the rest of the world. And we started Auroville in 1968. That's before I'm born. There's 3,063 people as of today from 58 countries. That's an immense diversity that we have. And that's growing. Every year I look at those statistics, it increases. we're getting new countries, and the community is a growing, thriving community. So I would call it a very successful community. And these were the founders, Gustavo Bindo and Mira Alfassa, who was a French Jewess who became interested in the mystical path and then went to live with him in Pondicherry, and they created this idea slowly over many decades. It came out of something called integral yoga, which is a form of yoga where one could say all life is yoga, like your whole life is for unity, to develop this oneness. And what's very beautiful in Auroville is there was a very clear dream, and there was a very clear vision, and this is also something that's going to come up when I'm going to touch upon part 2. If you want to start a community, you should iterating a very clear vision and dream, even if it's not identical to the Auroville dream. It's the most important thing you can do if you want to form a community, because that dream and that vision and those common goals will allow you to align with a common purpose, basically. So I'm just going to read an excerpt of the Auroville dream, and this was from Mira Alfassa. There should be a place on earth which no nation could claim it its own. Now, most people are going to like that idea because everyone's had the hassle of moving around with passports, of being from a third world country and then trying to get to a first world country, or, you know, there's all this divisionism that comes from your national identity. So this is beautiful. Even though it's based in India, the dream said no nation should own it. And rather than our fighting instinct, we would direct that instinct to conquer the source of our sufferings of misery, which is a very neocortical, very elevated way. Like, use your intellect, use your consciousness to make life happier. Who doesn't want a happy life? Children can grow and develop integrally without losing contact with their souls. So this education and this idea of creating a child-centric place where children really are given a whole environment that they can grow in their full potential. And education is not just for exams, although we do have exams if you want it. It's not like we are, it's not a dogma, these are just guidelines. If students want to go do exams, they can do them. We have schools that offer exams and we have schools that don't offer exams. But now many universities are recognizing experience in communities as qualification to get into university. That's happening a lot in Europe. So beauty in all its artistic forms, so there's obviously this emphasis on art and beauty. Money is no longer the sovereign lord. This is a big one that you really feel in Auroville when you live inside the community. You feel that there's a force that's not money that's driving it. We have money, we have access to money, we have millions of dollars of grants and donations coming in every year. Because it's a mature, established community, it's not struggling anymore. We have an abundance of resources. We have a surplus of almost everything that we could need. But you don't feel this force or power of money, where the minute I leave Auroville, I feel that very strongly. I feel no money, no honey, basically. You're on your own. And you have pockets, of course. You have pockets of that moneylessness. And I'll touch upon that in a further slide. And then your work is obviously where you're offering yourself for something higher and also for the community. And there's collaboration and brotherhood. So it does sound a bit like John Lennon's Imagine, but the reason it sounds similar to Imagine is because these ideas are universal. Every man and woman from every place, once you've got your basic needs taken care of, you're going to want to have unity, you're going to want to have a higher sense of purpose. You could say these are kind of universal ideas. Yogananda's ideas also encapsulated something very similar. And we had a dream and we have a charter, so this just reiterates aspects of the dream. This is the mother's handwriting where she wrote it in French. Originally she was multilingual. And basically it belongs to humanity as a whole. There's unending education, there's constant progress. So we're really trying to say, are we evolving? Are we constantly checking ourselves? Are we developing? Are we growing? There's a youth that never ages. So there's this emphasis on, so Ayurveda had, one of the things was this rasayana and was also kaya kalpa, basically preserving the body and looking after it as a temple so that you could have a whole and a full life. So unending education, constant progress, and a youth that never ages. And then a bridge between the past and the future. So we don't just abandon the past and say this is a futuristic project, but we have one foot in now India has this very deep, rich heritage and past, and of course we are not just about India, we're about all civilizations and all cultures. But in the case of Auroville, that the Vedic ideas, the ideas that were developed in Jainism or Buddhism, they're all incorporated very strongly into the center point of Auroville is the Center for Silence and Meditation, which was one of India's big gifts in its philosophy in all of the traditions. And there's a place of material and spiritual research. and it's a living embodiment of actual human unity. So the ultimate goal, if you just put in one word, one phrase, is human unity. Basically, we're looking for this unity of mankind, and the research side is very interesting because it's a very beautiful place to do research from. I direct a research institute there, which works with Sanskrit, and I find that the work and the quality of the work, the spirit of the work, firstly, it's much easier. There's this flow. There's this incredible will of people to contribute and to help each other. And it just feels like work is going much smoother there. And particularly research. There's a lot of micro research going on. We're doing all sorts of things in every field. You'll see the fields I'm going to touch on. So this was the inauguration. We took soil from 124 countries and we put it into the center point of Auroville. And that's open, you can go there. It's in a beautiful peace park in the middle of Auroville. This is what it looks like from the sky, from a drone. That is the center of Auroville, and there's a little amphitheater there, so we often have concerts or performances. That's one of our open air performance spaces. So we had a plan which we implement. There's a town plan like all towns, and we have our own sort of planning facility in the center of Auroville, and it's based in zones, basically. So we have an international zone, we have a cultural zone, industrial zone, and a residential zone. And the center is a peace zone. It's basically dedicated to peace. So that is the Matrimandir, and that is the Park of Peace and Unity around it. So everything sort of rotates around that. And then we have a green belt buffering, protecting the city outside, which is basically, it's forest, but there are people living there, but they're all totally off-grid. They're not in an urban environment. They're totally in a green zone. So the idea of the green zone was that we have this lung around the city that protects us. So this is just a sketch from our town planning. This is our Crown Road, one of the roads going around Auroville. And someone's talking very loudly. I'm wondering if it can be muted. Is it? Sorry.
Okay, let me try.
Sorry about that. It's just.
And somebody see what's happening.
And so there is a very beautiful town plan. A lot of effort goes into planning, and we have the macro plan and then we have the micro plan. Right in the center is this place of meditation. It has no dogma attached to it. It's open to all. Like Joan, for example, does transcendental meditation and the city program. We have many of the people coming from that program and doing their cities there. No one bothers about which teacher or which sect or which group of meditation you do, whether it's Buddhistic, but it's basically a site for silence. So there's no talking in there. You can talk, but you'll be asked to keep quiet if you do. It's very beautiful. It has an inner chamber. It has a very symbolic architecture where you sort of walk up towards a place of meditation. And this was the design. It's called sort of the center point of the city. And around it you can see there's this very beautiful peace park. And this is from the air. And we have different gardens. We have one garden dedicated for children. And we have gardens that are dedicated to different aspects of human consciousness. So this is the layout and design of our gardens. You can just see these are three of the gardens. And it's called the Garden of Unexpected. It's for children, so it's very playful, and kids are welcome in the gardens. And also the kids go in the schools into the silence chamber, but they don't go with the adults. Older kids do. I can't remember the exact age. I think it's 10 that you can go in with the adults. But the younger kids obviously might not always be silent, although my kids generally, when you say it's silent, they seem to somehow respect it. But not all kids, might be at ease with that. And there are times for kids also. The schools take kids in. So these are the beautiful gardens around. And these are open, and I often go walk there in the evenings, or when I have guests, I will take them. And there's fountains, and it's basically a park dedicated to peace, so it's a thematic park. It has a bit of access control because we don't want to make it totally open to the public. You should be staying in Auroville and connected to Auroville somehow. There are public areas which are obviously more free and open, but we have sort of different zones that have different levels of access. So this is Auroville in numbers. There's already 3,000 people, 58 countries, 130 communities. At any one time we have more than 1,000 volunteers there. A lot of those volunteers graduate on to actually join the community. It's 10 square kilometers of land at the moment, almost 10. And there's 10 schools, quite a lot of schools for 3,000 people. But that's also because there's this emphasis on research and experimentation. They planted 3 million trees and still planting. 5 square kilometers is just forest. So obviously in South Africa we have that luxury of finding land that's already got a lot of trees, but there, I'll show you what it looked like before. It looked like the Karoo basically before. And we have 150 commercial units, 31 international centers around the world of Auroville. There's 400 acres of farmland with 24 farms at the moment. And then this is very significant. It's not just about what we have, but whenever we make something for ourselves, there's also outreach, which is giving to the villages and the communities around Auroville. So there's 800 outreach students in 3 schools that are educated for free by Auroville. And those are operated by Aurovillian residents and volunteers on the fundraising. And then we have 6 educational centers, like adult educational centers, bless you. And then we've adopted a lot of villages. We have health facilities, self-help groups, and then we also employ a lot of people from around, and a lot of those become Aurovillians down the line. So if you look at it in the context of South Africa, as a solution to a lot of the social problems, if we look at over 50 years, it would be a great gift if we sort of could create communities that can stabilize and root themselves and then start to give back around, but not just give back in terms of giving something, but actually giving a whole solution to all aspects of life. This is what the outreach does. It's not just solving one problem. It's saying, okay, we're going to come up together. We're all going to come up together. And that's the basis of the outreach. And it's all informal, the outreach. It's not like there's one person doing all the outreach or one NGO. It's hundreds of little projects knitted together and unified. So UNESCO recognized Auroville very early, which obviously helps in terms of fundraising and identity. And obviously UNESCO aligned with Auroville because it's also trying to unify cultures. This is the terraformation that we did. So this is what the land looked like before on the top right. It was a barren plain with not even a tree in the lands that we had. And this is what it looks like today. And that's before, and that's after. So occasionally we get a cyclone that obviously comes and knocks a few trees down, but it's fine. We use that wood and we build houses, and that's the only thing but it wouldn't impact on this. Water is obviously one of the very important things that we focus on. So we've got the check dams, there's flow forms obviously for dynamization of water, and then we've got our own, we're totally independent with water. We also have a desalination plant. In case we haven't needed it yet. And that's on the sea, it's on the coast. So there's incredible expertise that's been built up over the last 5 decades with water awareness, and it's a big part of any development that we do is we think of harvesting the water, of recycling the water, of total independence with the water. We build our own windmills, and this is one of them in the forest, very colourful. And rather than just go for tar roads, which is petroleum coming from the Middle East, we decided to make our own roads. We have an Earth Institute, so we have quite a scientific sort of lab where we can test the quality and the strength of the blocks. So we made these paved roads made of earth from Auroville. It's just been compressed with a little bit of cement is there. It's a very low percent, but it's needed. And these are the paved roads that we build. These are my kids cycling there. They are our own homemade roads, and we have our own road service that builds roads, basically. And then, of course, we have many paths just winding through the forest. Those are the informal roads. The roads are more on what's been sort of designated as a major road, and then we'll have a lot of these paths that look like that. We have the UNESCO Chair of Earth Building in Auroville, so there is incredible expertise, and then also we share that knowledge. So any of you could come to Auroville and do a training on how to build with Adobe, and that's rammed earth, that is cobbing, that is making domes out of your own homemade bricks that you make from your own earth. So the idea is these are soils from all around the world. The idea is to really work with what's in your environment and build with what's in your environment. And it doesn't have to be fired. You don't need to do that energy-intensive firing of the bricks, basically. This is a huge dome we built, not in Auroville, but that was a knowledge transfer. It's in Coimbatore at the Isha Ashram, I think it's called, yeah. And that was done with a dome. So there's as I mentioned earlier, beauty was one of the themes, and an important, significant theme, because often people see yoga and spirituality as austerity, but it's actually about embracing the beauty of life. So we have incredible beautification and experimentation with different building materials. This is my neighbor Damesh. This is his studio that he built. This is a beautiful home. So there's always this emphasis on art and form. And I mean, not everyone's going to like everything like any art. Sometimes you'll see something that's not your style, but there's this drive towards doing things in a way that's creating works of art. And a lot of architects are coming from around the world and studying what we're doing there. So this is our library. It's built with rammed earth. So it's really the only library I know in my life that I've been into where you walk into an earth building. So this is just earth that's literally being compacted, and that's the library. There is obviously some other materials, but the majority is rammed earth. And it just seems to make a very conducive environment for you feel more connected in buildings like that. It's called biological architecture. So there was an epic poem by Sri Aurobindo called Savitri, and this building was fundraised and built just for that poem. So it's really like a museum, living museum of that particular poem, the Savitri poem. And the building, obviously this is from the sky, it was built to capture, so as you go into the building, it's meant to capture feelings of that poem. So this happens in the mature phase of a community. When you're in the pioneer phase, which we'll talk about just now, you obviously wouldn't be doing stuff like this, but this is 5 decades down the line once you've already got it. And then this building was built just for languages. This is our language lab where they even teach Esperanto. You can come and learn language. And this is a blue zone. You can't carry your mobile phone into this building. It says no phones, or you have to put it on flight mode. It's a totally blue zone. And it was built with bio-cooling, so it's got wind tunnels where they funnel. So once again, this emphasis on experimentation, natural materials, and independence. So there's no policy of blue zones, although we don't have cell towers in Auroville. But this particular building, the steward of the building said it's going to be a blue zone. So you have that right in Auroville to sort of say, okay, this building's going to be a blue zone. This is one of our housing projects. If you are below 40, I think it is, you can get a free house here, and there's about half of them are free right now. This is for youth, and it won a Green Building Award, International Award, and 2 different awards. It's one of my it's called Humanscapes. It's one of my favorite buildings. It's got spaces to be. It was also built with rammed earth, as you can see, and it's free housing for youth. There was a grant, we fundraised for the particular grant, and then we give it back to the community. The only criteria is you have to contribute to the community, and then any youth can have that. And we have many similar programs where the housing is free. The idea really was that everyone gets a free house. It's not realized that 100%, but this is in that step very much so. This is a Nakashima piece table. It's made from a single piece of wood. George Nakashima was a famous carpenter, and he put these in key places around the world where people would sit when they have conflict. And this is a point also, if you're going to be seeding a community, you are going to have conflict. You need to engineer the tools for conflict resolution. So this table and the special chairs, you can see he also made the chairs, is one of the spaces. We have many spaces for non-violent communication, different forms of conflict. We basically realize we are going to have conflict, and we need spaces and tools and teams that deal with resolving conflict. And this is one of them. So you can go anytime if you have a conflict and sit around this table. It's in a pavilion called Unity Pavilion, and it's there. And it's a table dedicated for resolving conflict. So money is a big one. People often come to Auroville and they ask, how does money actually work in Auroville? So the whole thing is to move away from money. We do need money, but it's moving away from money as the predominant force of the community. And I'll just show you, on the left there is a free restaurant. It's the tea hut where you can go and have snacks and tea for free. So that's in the gift economy. Of course you can give a donation, but there's no expectation, and no one will make you feel uncomfortable for taking every day. We have free shops, which are just free. So whenever I have things that I don't need, I take them to the free shop. It's called the free store. And when people need something that they don't have, they go to the free store and they look for it. Usually you find it. I've often gone in there and found things that I didn't know I needed, but I still found them. And then we have a library of things, which is basically more, things that you don't need all the time. You need them occasionally, like a drill, or you don't use a drill every day. And then you go and you borrow it and you give it back, and it gets maintained by the library. And we have a tailoring service where we have like cooperatives. So I'll show you a bit later how our supermarkets work, which is my favorite supermarkets. And then obviously we have the gift economy where people are coming and contributing, volunteering in exchange for food or accommodation. So the whole idea is to move towards money, and you can actually operate in Auroville theoretically without touching money for the rest of your life if you say get a maintenance from Auroville, if you work as a teacher or in some project, the maintenance is enough to cover all your basic needs. So you're not going to be wealthy, but you'll actually be more wealthy than possibly working very hard and earning a lot of money somewhere else where there's not so much provided for you. So it all depends what your needs really are. But we can go into this. And then we do have Commerce, which contributes a lot of money for Auroville. I think it was 600 lakhs last year when I looked at the report. A lakh is 100,000 rupees, so you can do the maths. That's a lot of money. Because 100,000 rupees is about 20,000 rand. So 600 times 20,000 rand is what the commercial units contributed to Auroville last year. And so we make spirulina, we do organic clothes, we do woodwork, incense, and we have a metal workshop, we do consulting, we make surfboards. I mean, this is just 1% of what's been made, but there's all sorts of industry that you'll find in any city. And this is my friend started a chocolate factory, I call it Choc Commerce. So, and it's a woman empowerment project, she employs women, and they make organic fair trade chocolate, and very fine chocolate, very consciously made, and then the profits from this goes to support the community. And at the same time, besides generating profits, so you don't pay tax to the government in India, you pay tax to Auroville, and the tax, it's a 33% tax to the community. The whole project of Auroville is tax exempt, but we do tax the unit to the community, and then that gets used to run the community. So this is just one example, and she just came from Bali. She had been working, she was Australian, but she had been working, and he was French, and they got together and started this chocolate factory.
When you say community, do you mean your own community or the ones outside? Your 33%?
The 30% goes to Auroville as a tax, so it goes to called the central fund. So instead of paying tax to the government, like here you run a business and it goes to the government, the tax goes, it's not really a tax, it's called a contribution. It goes to the community, and the community then has panels and people on committees that decide where it goes, education, roads, whatever we need. So yeah, so this is an Auroville run business. It's different to having your own business because you'll never own it. You can take a salary, you can upskill yourself, you can take your expenses, but it's basically run by Auroville and it's owned by Auroville. And communication infrastructure, this is our fiber optical cable, so we obviously trying to move away from Wi-Fi radiation. We have building biologists that live in Auroville. People don't want towers and radiation in the community, so we've laid fiber through the whole community, so your home, wherever you live, can be connected to our own interconnected fiber, and it's super fast. There's this incredible emphasis on ecological and green practices. So even though it wasn't started as an eco-village, which is that word to denote a community that's basically eco-orientated, it is an eco-village, basically. That comes by default when you live consciously. So we've got our own recycling and upcycling and check dams. We do eco-architecture, earth building, paper making, permacultures all over, and different forms of sustainable agriculture. And then there's also like this awareness of waste, so we'll do an annual trash and show where we take waste and we do a trash show. And there's outreach where we're going outside. This is a garbology course which goes around into schools in India, because India's got a huge problem with waste, anyone who's been there. Auroville's one of the few places, and India of course is improving. In the last few years there's something called Swachh Bharat, so it's got this incredible cleaning up, but the problems are of a massive size in India. And there's this outreach program, so whatever we do, it's not just for ourselves, it's also for other. This is Portus, some of you might have been there. So usually here, like when I would say go to Woolworths or to my organic shop in Sea Point, Sans, this is a very different experience because you don't need any money in your pocket, you don't need a wallet or a credit card or a debit card, there's no exchange of money, you just put into a basket what you want, they just record what you've taken, and then you leave. So you decide every month what you think you would need for your basic sustenance. This is like your everything you need, your food, your toiletries and so forth. And you self-monitor it every month, and you decide if you've gone over, that you get a report monthly. So, and you basically put in more or you put in less. And if you put in more and there's a surplus, it goes to help people who maybe are struggling that month, and it helps them. So you can basically shop without thinking about what's the price, comparing prices, and everything is at cost. You're not buying things where they're making a profit on you. And this has grown over the last decade. It's a phenomenal project. It's also wasteless. It's one of our supermarkets. We have other kinds of supermarkets. It's called Portus, which means for all. That was the name that the mother gave for. Safety is a big one, and also we're going to touch upon that in the South African context. Auroville is extremely safe, and you can move freely at night through a deep, dark, inky black forest. I cycled about a month and a half ago. I was cycling through the forest after midnight, and then the thought crossed my mind, wow, I wouldn't do this in South Africa in many places. And what a wonderful ability. And this is really the level of security we need. People have to feel safe. So we have a safety team. It's not armed response or anything like that, but it's basically volunteer run, and then some employed security teams, and then we basically just keep an eye on the community. So safety is a big part. We make our own clothes, so this is one of our organic fair trade projects, where we are working with the farmers to convert or to support their organic agriculture. This is Colours of Nature, where they dye with indigo, and then we also dye with different herbs, so we dye our own clothes. I actually was dressed in a indigo dyed shirt, but then I thought, because we're filming it, I'll dress up a little bit. But I wanted to show you the Auroville grown organic cotton, because usually I'm wearing cotton grown in Auroville. I'm very proud of that, and it's dyed in Auroville. I know it's dyed by Jesus. I always joke when I take people, I say he's the dyeing master, because it's a play on words, and his name is Jesus. He's from Spain. And we have this thing of conscious and ethical fashion. So we're really trying to rethink the whole idea of fashion and consuming of clothes. So you can live just with clothes made in the community. And then we have a huge number of farms, and this is in our town hall there on the top right. We do the Fukuoka method, we're doing a bit of biodynamic, we're doing permaculture. It's all organic, all our farms. And then we're doing hydroponics. Those are my neighbors that grow vegetables and leafy greens hydroponically. So farming is a big part of it, and to be self-sustainable. We eat communally in that solar kitchen, and that's a solar concentrator on the top left there, where we concentrate sunlight. So on the sunny days, which is a lot in India, especially South India, we cook on sunlight, and it's a lovely vegetarian buffet. It is free for the children and for the community. If you're working inside of Auroville, it's free. Basically, it's on your meal plans, and then for guests there's a nominal fee. But even if you're paying, it's a very reasonable sum. I think it's something like 200 or 300 rand for a full month of eating a full organic buffet. And if we just had one of those in South Africa, it would be amazing. And that's mostly from our own farms. It's super delicious and wholesome. So when your money is not going all the time to just feeding yourself a wholesome diet, you don't have that stress of this constant pressure of. So these are all aspects, the different layers of money changing its essence. This is the solar condenser. It's one of the biggest in India. I've actually worked there. It concentrates sunlight. Anyone can do that. You just need to build it once, and then you've got free energy for cooking. You make steam, and then you cook on the steam. And that's what it looks like from the sky. That's the solar condenser on the top of the building. So that's the solar kitchen. It's another earth building. It's built of earth. Besides the solar kitchen, we have...
Isn't that the biggest solar kitchen in the world?
I don't know that. I didn't want to say that because I wasn't 100% sure yet. But I know it's one of the biggest. It's definitely the most delicious. So communal eating. So you have a lot of other choices of eating out. And it's also important in a community to have choices and also let people be creative. So we have people from Korea who do Korean food. We'll have from Japan doing Japanese food. So you've got this incredible, and it's always done consciously. It kind of makes life more fun when there's cafes. I know Anthea has a favorite cafe called Bread and Chocolate, which is organic, and it's that one on the top left. So we have that kind of gourmet cafe culture. It's also there, and the cafes are very nice for meetings and so forth. So because it's already a mature, established community, we can do things like this. In the beginning, you would just want your communal eating and your self-sustaining. We're going to look at the beginning, how it would look. We have a beautiful silent restaurant. This is just one of our little restaurants. It's my neighbor, where you eat in silence, and it's a buffet of Korean food. But it just gives you an idea of the diversity with food.
Roughly how many?
How many different restaurants?
Yeah.
Close to 100, I think, if you add them all up. Yeah, it's a lot. Because every culture, all those 58 countries want you to taste their food. So I can think of 3 Italian restaurants, at least 4 Korean, then another 10 ice gelaterias, when we got about 3 And then we've got delivery services, and then we've got the visitor centre, then there'll be in just the visitor centre there might be 10 eateries. One will be dosa, one will be...
Sure.
So it's very diverse. And then there's food festivals, we have like food festival. So it is a foodie place, but it's all about wholesome food. A lot of the moms that have got kids with gluten intolerance come and bring their kids to because all our wheat is organic. That was an initiative that I worked on a few years ago. So if you see something in Auroville you want to change, you change it. You don't wait for it to change. So my kids were at school and they were getting the bread, and it was good bread, whole wheat bread, but the flour wasn't organic, and I knew too much about the wheat industry in India. So I then helped the bakery source from the farmers. So we just get a container delivered from the farms in the wheat growing areas, and we grind it fresh. So, and it worked out 3 or 4 rupees a kilogram more, but now the whole community is organic, basically. So it's not a place that you just go and expect everything to be perfect. If you don't like something, get involved. If you don't like a friend didn't like seeing plastic on the beach, he started a beach cleaning program. So you basically are the community. There is no authority there. The mother said divine anarchy. It's an anarchy that's driven by divinity, basically. So energy. So this is something that we realized in the last decade while I was living there. Most of our public buildings have huge arrays of solar panels, but the bulk of our energy, ironically, comes from wind. We've got 6 huge wind turbines that aren't in Auroville because Auroville's not windy enough. We put them, it's about 10 hours drive away in a very windy place, and then we give that energy to the grid and we take it from the grid. So it goes into the same, it's called wheeling. So I just got the numbers yesterday. It's 9 gigawatts a year we generate on our wind, and we only use 5.5. So we have a surplus of 3.5 gigawatts a year, which generates income. So not only are we energy negative, we also generate income from our surplus electricity that we generate. So this also happens in the mature phase. We had the solar panels and the little grassroots glued together solution initially, but now Auroville's kind of grown up. It's an adult, basically. And it's good to see where a community can go. And it's nice because we basically have free electricity for all projects, so you don't have to think. Obviously, you don't take advantage of that. We get a report of how much you've used. It doesn't mean you can just sort of, go wild, but you use it for sustaining yourself and for the community. And then obviously we have a lot of electric vehicle transport. Only 10% of Auroville uses electric vehicles. A lot of them use bicycles, the other. But it's still a big percent, because if you said 10% of Cape Town was electric, you would feel it, basically. You would feel it in your lungs, and you'd feel it. 1 in 10 cars that passed you would use electric. But it's something that's accelerating, and we're accelerating it. So we make our own electric vehicles, and we have charging stations, and we have units all over. This was the impact report a friend of mine, Deborah, did of the impact of electric vehicles. And then, of course, we're charging on our own energy from wind, so it's completely carbon neutral, the transport. In my personal story, I was trying to be a pioneer there. So in 2007, I got a little electric car, and then I got another one and a little electric bike. And those were made in India. They were called Reva. So long before Tesla and all these other companies, India was actually doing very successful electric cars. The gift economy is probably the part of Auroville that touches me most deeply, because I ran an institute there that's there for 10 years, and at least once a week someone contacts me and says, I want to offer my time and services. Now, often these are people that are earning very high salaries. They've just come out of the corporate world. They have incredibly valuable skills, and they're saying, I want to work for nothing. In our office, we do give food. We don't accept people to work for nothing. We insist to feed them. We give electric vehicle charging, and sometimes we give accommodation. I just felt that that's like the minimum we should be able to offer to our volunteers. We've just got a grant for my project, which is called Sanskrit Research Institute, to possibly build a building, and then we'll build accommodation. So we'll have our own accommodation. So then it doesn't have to be an expense. It will just be something that we operate in our little building. But the volunteer aspect of Auroville, everyone arrives as a volunteer, no matter who you are. The initial pioneers all came. They hoed the soil. They basically planted the trees, and they prepared the land for this beautiful, planted the 3 million trees. So that spirit of volunteership is very deep. And I was discussing with a friend, like, what is the feeling that you feel the strongest in Auroville? That he said was goodwill, basically, that feeling of just, and when you form a community, if you can get together with at least a majority, you don't have to have everyone, because not everyone's able to give. we're all in different times of life where we might not be in a position, we might see it as a goal or something that we want to do. We might be too busy, or we might be pulled into too many other directions. But that spirit of giving, that gift economy and volunteership is really the real energy of Auroville. And then the other spirit is the spirit of outreach. Now, everything that we do is done in the sense of not just what can we do for Auroville, what can we do for the villages around Auroville. And if you quantified the benefit that the villagers have seen, it would be immense if you put it into one report. This is just one unit of the chocolate factory. They're employing only women. So it's basically not just a job for life, but it's giving them constant life skills training, upskilling, education for the children. Obviously chocolate, they get free chocolate, I know it because friends of mine work there. And so that's nice to get paid in chocolate. And then that's also a Swedish woman, Martina, one of my friends there. She does an upskilling, and she's employing women and teaching them how to create foods. And a lot of them have spun off their own little units in the village, making biscuits or jams or something useful. So it's really about giving from day one, hitting the ground running, but also thinking, what can I give? But there are times in forming a community, when Auroville was planting the trees, that idea of giving, because we couldn't even give shade at that point, or water. We had to first stabilize the groundwater and create shade. And then that shade allowed us to transform the soil and then create agriculture. So those phases we needed to go through, and that's the fledgling phase. This is another outreach. So we've got a botanical garden and huge biospheres inside of Auroville. And one of our biospheres was asked to do a biosphere in Chennai, one of the most polluted cities in the world. So we did this 58-acre biosphere. You can see, and you can go and visit it if you land in Chennai and you have time. And it's another project I'm very proud of. So we basically adopted this part of Chennai. 58 acres is a lot in a city, in the heart of a metro. And we transformed it with upskilling them and teaching them how to run the biosphere. We made these floating, this was actually a gentleman from Findhorn who came to live. We've got a Findhorn house in Auroville where anyone from Findhorn can come stay for a year for free with their family. And then he came and he taught us how to do these floating islands that clean the water. So they've got solar panels. I'm not sure exactly what the panels are doing. I didn't study it in detail, but they've got all sorts of plants, and it's very scientific, and it cleans the water biologically. And they float around and do it. And if you want, I can get you the name of that project. And he's busy doing that in Adya Park right now, making these floating islands. Obviously organic farming, and not just the farming, but the seeds is very important. Often when I'll eat organics, I'll say, where are the seeds from? Because it's one thing doing organic, but it's also important to get your seeds. And we have a seed bank in Auroville. It's called Anadana, where we keep the seeds safely in a dry place. There's a special science of storing seeds. So it's one of the seed banks of the world is in Auroville. And then obviously you can come and get seeds. Anyone can come and get seeds. That's in our botanical garden. So we do this is our rice and ragi, that's a kind of millet farm. That's our town hall that's growing vegetables. That's a Buddha garden where you can come and get free house and food just for volunteering in a farm. And then obviously we do a lot of training. We do permaculture training all the time. It's constantly running in Auroville. And then this is just one of the farms. It was a friend of mine, he's also a musician, so I used to jam with him. He decided he's going to follow Masanobu Fukuoka. I don't know, has anyone read One Straw Revolution? Yeah. So that's the kind of do-nothing farming, which doesn't really work that well in India. It works in Japan where the ecology and the climate's quite different. So he had to adapt it for India, but he did an amazing job. He also learned Tamil. So what he's doing is he's not only doing incredible permaculture and farming there, he's teaching the local villagers to return to organic farming. His name's Krishna. And he has a farm-to-table restaurant there, which if any of you come, I'll take you. So everything you eat on that plate, that whole plate is farmed on his farm, this little farm. And it's a beautiful feeling to do that. So one of the ideas was to celebrate all cultures, because if you want human unity, you can't sort of have people saying like this is better or this is like the only culture. So the idea was really to bring all cultures together in Auroville. So we have these international pavilions. That's the Inuit statue in the Canadian pavilion. There's the Tibetan pavilion on the corner. This is our African pavilion, which includes South Africa. And that's the international pavilion, which includes all other countries. And then, of course, we have, I can't remember exactly how many, but maybe 10 or 15 other pavilions, and more on the cards, Ukrainian, Belarusian, they're all being designed and developed. So the idea was to have these little parks of every country and culture there. So remember I said that there's 130 plus communities within a community. So So it's not just one community inside Auroville. There's sub-communities, like there will be a community of painters that got together and said, and there's a community of musicians. It doesn't have to always align on a common interest. But if you say want to form your own community within a community, so this was the treehouse community. All they want to do is live in tree houses, which actually can survive cyclones. So they're quite impressively engineered tree houses. And they live in tree houses and they teach people how to build tree houses. They run workshops on tree houses. It's one of the very eclectic, interesting communities there. So that's one of our communities. There's this incredible emphasis on the arts, and this is one of our plays put on. We have a big auditorium and many performance areas. And when you do a play there, I've also been involved because I write music for musicals. Because it's not commercially driven and there's a lot of gift economy and a lot of volunteership, it feels very different also. So it's much easier to be an artist there because you're not thinking like, am I going to sell enough tickets to, firstly there's no price for the tickets, it's all free. And there's a lot of subsidies and contributions and there's a lot of resources inside the community that we're already sharing. So being creative there, I know friends that are doing this all the time, it's much easier than where you have to think commercially to be an artist and to be a commercial artist. This is another play we put in one of our outdoor amphitheaters. This was a painting exhibition just done during the lockdown. It's called Out of Lockdown. So we had it now when I was there. That was a month and a half ago, and it was our artists that just painted in this theme of Out of Lockdown.
Did you have a lockdown there as well?
Well, officially India had lockdowns for a brief period. That was a year ago, but Auroville had quite a lot of autonomy within that. So even though there were lockdowns, it was a forest and it was quite autonomous despite the lockdowns, and it maintained itself and very, very wholesomely and healthily. This is our kindergarten, which is also an earth building. One of our kindergartens, there are actually 3 kindergartens. Once again, research. So some people didn't like this kindergarten, so they did another kindergarten. Then they didn't like the 2, then they did another one. And this is our kindergarten from the sky. It's in the forest, so it's really a kindergarten. It's a garden. You know, you're in a garden. You're basically in a big forest. My daughters would go and pick the amala fruits and then like bring them home. So there would be a fruit forest around the kindergarten. There's incredible emphasis, and a lot of our, I'd say most of our budget goes towards education, and that's lifelong learning. It's not just for childhood education. So this is one of our schools called Last School, which is a very free school. You can almost come there and say, I want to learn Old Greek, or I want to learn to fix cars, and then they will assign or find a teacher for you. It's almost child-centric and child-driven for the older years. But the other thing with education that you learn is you don't actually need a formal education because it's everywhere. Everywhere in Auroville there are teachers and places to learn. So a lot of kids are just going around doing different courses, different seminars, staying with different teachers. And quite a few of my neighbors, like a friend just went on to a top theatre school in Israel just from his acting experience in Auroville. He got in on the audition. It was the most competitive one. He didn't have much formal education. He had just had this forest education and a lot of theatre. He wanted to do theatre and make movies. And another neighbour of mine from Spain's daughter did the same in Barcelona, got into a top cinematographic school just on her experience in Auroville. So we're thinking of education really in its true sense of not just in terms of certificates. And it's really everywhere. There's everything you can think of that you want to learn. And it's once again in the spirit of not moneylessness. So you don't have to think of all this extracurricular fees you have to save up for sending your kids to so many things that you want them to do. But it's all already there, basically, for you and waiting for you. There was just a shot. So Beautification. So this is our labyrinth, and at the Botanical Garden you can actually really get lost in it. That's I went in there and I couldn't actually get out for a while, which is not a bad thing. It's not actually such a bad thing. But I just want to show you there's this idea of beautification. So whenever we do something, it even looks nice from the sky, basically. And this is a container just outside of our supermarket, but there's this idea to try and beautify as much as possible. So you're living in a place that is embracing you with beauty. And kids are very free there. Like from the age of 6, my daughter was cycling to school alone with her sister, not needing accompaniment. So they move freely, they play freely. It's very safe for them. They feel very safe and protected in the space. So this is something a community should give to children, that they can move freely and safely. It's something we've largely lost in South Africa, and we need to see how we can rekindle that. And once again, elderly. Remember I was saying early on that the kibbutz was the place to observe. The elderly were very content, and I do feel the same with Auroville. I have a very elderly mom now who's been cared for, and I always think it would have been better to have her in a place like Auroville, because there's so much within reach. You don't have to get in a car for activities. Everything is free, and there's so much art and culture that you're in this sort of river of constant beauty, art and culture. And obviously, India has a tradition of caring for the elderly very beautifully. Of course, she's being very beautifully cared for here, but I often sort of project like how it is to be cared for as an elderly person. And this is one of our facilities for caring for people when they can't care for themselves independently. And we have quite a few beautiful facilities, but they're very much integrated in the community. It's not like isolated facilities. And we have a lot of festivals that will pick up topics. So South Africa, of course, will do that, but often it will be commercial, or there will be some grant or some idea from the government. Inside of the community, we sort of pick up ideas that are already moving with momentum in Auroville, and then we will turn it into a festival. So there are grants available to us for that. This was the Endangered Craft Mela. Mela means a festival in Hindi. And what we did is we said, what are all the crafts that are on the edge of endangerment in India? We did a survey, there were about 60 of them. And then we sponsored those artisans to come to Auroville, sit there for a week and teach people how to learn those crafts. So this happened in our youth camp and was run by the youth and by one of our schools. And then we had a conscious fashion festival a few years in a row that was like a fashion show in the forest, barefoot, organic clothes, of course. And then all the models were like all ages, all sizes. There wasn't this idea of just one size and one age of model. And it was just very beautiful spirit. And people came from around the world for that. So because we have so much collective resources already, we're already in the adult phase of a community. It's very easy. Like I've put in a bid to host the Sanskrit Computational Linguistics conference, and I know that organizing it in Auroville, firstly, all the venues are free. There's no charges for anything. So I don't have to think of hiring a hotel, paying salaries to conference staff, because we've already got all the volunteers inside Auroville. So dreaming and then doing in Auroville, and this is one of the beauties of living in an established community. You can dream up something and then just make it happen very easily. You don't have to think of this M word of money all the time. You can make it happen with very little money. And health is a very strong focus. So this is one of our healing centers. We have a lot of healing centers. There was a joke when I moved there that almost everyone was a healer in Auroville. It's not really true, but at least a single-digit % are healers. There's a lot of healing. We get all of our therapies for free. Now, I don't have time because I'm very busy when I go there with my work, but theoretically I could have a different therapy every day of the month with a different therapist and not spend a cent. And that could be anything from Ayurvedic massage to Watsu to every kind of body alignment. That is gifted to us because we have the gift economy within ourselves with healing arts, basically. And the way those healers, some of them are supported on maintenances, and some will then charge guests and then use that to subsidize when they're treating Aurovillians. So this is a map we made with one of our volunteers under the CEDAR project. It was called Anatomy of an Eco-Village. I can send it to you. It's basically, we just wanted like a big wall poster that just shows you what is there in an eco-village, and you can spend some time with it. But all of the things that I've touched upon and more are there. So it's good to kind of have a map, because when you have a map, you know, okay, this is kind of where I want to go, like from here to here to here. So this was just the anatomical map of the community. So about 5 years ago, there was a volunteer that later went on. She was very interested in studying communities, and I was also interested in this. And the reason this interest came in me was a lot of people would come to me in Auroville and say, why aren't there more places like Auroville in the world? Now, there are a lot of communities out there, but there's not on the scale and the complexity and the diversity of Auroville. Feintorn comes close. The kibbutzes were good, and some of them had like 1,000 people living there. And then obviously there were Damahur and Tamara. There were many communities, but Auroville, from what I had seen and what I'd studied, was already quite far ahead of other communities. So I thought, let's look at Auroville as a blueprint for creating communities and to dream, basically. And this is really the second part that we will go into. Maybe in the question and answer we can go into more detail, but I'm just going to touch upon it tonight. And I created this project under my institute of incubating called CEDAR, which is Centre for Eco-Village Development and Research. So we've had a number of volunteers working on different aspects. Like one did that map. The map was ready to visualize, because I'm quite visual, so I like to sort of see what's there. Because if I say the word Auroville, it's hard to picture everything that's there. But if I show you a picture of what's there, you can spend like half an hour going through and saying, oh, that's there, I wouldn't have thought of that. So it was an idea to visually represent what will be there. So the first thing we did was we did a comparative research, and that's where we looked at Auroville, and that Auroville was our main sort of prima study. But we also looked at Yogananda's model. The thing with Yogananda's model is they never managed to scale very big, and they weren't really growing. They were kind of diminishing communities, the ones that I followed. So we can discuss why, and there are different reasons, but there was a much narrower focus. It was really focused around Yogananda, whereas Auroville's not focused around one person or one particular way of thinking. You're very free to come in and have your ideas and just get on with them. And as long as you're in alignment with the human unity, which is the broader guideline of Auroville, there's no conflict of interest. And then we looked at the kibbutz, and then we worked with the Kibbutz Institute, and we studied sort of a meta-analysis of what was the impact of the kibbutz on people's lives in 111 years. How did it affect things like relationships? How did it actually affect quality of life? Were people happy in the kibbutz? Obviously, happiness is a very big indicator. And then we also looked at other communities around the world. So the idea was really to kind of make a blueprint that could be duplicated on any scale and be given, and document that, and almost someone could get this blueprint, see the steps they need to follow, see the obstacles they're going to face, see what they're going to need to have equipped themselves with, and then start building communities. And I've been working with Daniel and this beautiful EV Collective group also over the last years, just putting some of my ideas and energy, and also receiving their beautiful ideas and energy. And what I thought would work well in the Western Cape is, I mean, this is in the dream phase now. Obviously we need to do one, but it's to create an interlinked network of communities that are working together collaboratively. So down the line, let's say 50 years ahead or 30 years ahead, we're thinking that there won't just be one, but there'll be multiple communities, and they link together. And there's a lot of advantages of having that, because each region will have different produce that you can grow and different climates that you can tap into. And also people will be aligned with certain regions. Like I'm aligned to Cape Town, my mom is here, so when I come to South Africa and spend time here, I wouldn't like to be too far from Cape Town. So everyone's got their own personal preferences of where they want to be aligned with. So this was the idea. Using Auroville as a blueprint is something that I would like to put on the table. Obviously we can improve a blueprint, and Auroville's got quite a big scale, and it's very international, but it obviously has a lot of know-how, a lot of expertise, and all of the knowledge inside Auroville is open and available. Like if, say, we want to build a wind turbine tomorrow, I know exactly who we can call him, and being an Aurovillian and building a bridge with Auroville, we can create this link. We can even have people coming out and doing knowledge transfer, like we're doing with Findhorn. We'll have people coming from Findhorn, we have accommodation for them and food, and they do knowledge transfer, and then we have some Aurovillians going to Findhorn and doing that. So linking with a community like Auroville is definitely in the interest of any community that wants to form. As I'm based there very deeply, obviously I will share whatever I can from Auroville to any community that forms in South Africa. And
Kind of inspiration.
say again?
I missed the inspiration one. Were you going
Oh, this was, we've already touched on that, but this was just the different communities. Sorry, there was one more that I didn't mention that's important. Thanks, Paul. So it was the Auroville, the kibbutz, the Findhorn, Yogananda's World Brotherhood, and then obviously there's many other communities that were like many derived communities like Damahura and Tamara. The traditional San communities, I'm actually working for UCT at the moment with the San and Khoi languages as an advisor to preserve the endangered languages. So it's taken me very deeply into their world, and I would very strongly also look at the traditional communities. The San lived communally, they live very close to the earth. So if we're doing something in South Africa, I would keep that in the essence of whatever we're forming and link it to those traditional communities. They were very deeply communal. The Khoi came later, around 2,000 odd years ago, and then the different groups in South Africa. They came even later. But the San were the first people of South Africa, and they were the most connected with the land. And this is for hundreds of thousands of years. So I have access to experts now through my work with UCT with the San communities. And I think that it would be good to have a link and have a center that links it. And any land that we take would have been walked by the San, no matter where we walk in the Western Cape, because they were foragers. So they were moving wherever the food moved, basically. Usually it was places where there were rivers. You will see there's in Smithsvinkel Bay, you have that midden, and you have the cave. So usually there would be a river, there would be a cave for shelter, and there would be obviously nutrient-dense food sources. But they would also move based on different, because we are talking over 200,000 years, they would move based on the climates and based on different requirements all over the Western Cape and also all over Botswana and Namibia. But particularly for Western Cape, whatever land that we have, it would be good to link it with those San traditional communities. So these are the phases.
Can you go back one more?
Oh, that was just standing on the shoulder of giants. So like if we're going to do a community here, which we are,
Yeah.
and we're working on it, or communities, I'll say plural, we should stand on the shoulder of giants like you would with any science. And I also invite everyone in the room to come to Auroville, spend a few months there. I will take you around and I'll also give you like a crash course in what's there. So I'll fast track, because for me it took time to unravel and discover there's many layers within a community. But this standing on the shoulder of giants is something that should be done in any field of work that you do. Findhorn, okay, it was basically also started in 1962 at a caravan park. So it started very informally. It's got about 500 people. It's also international. It's very vibrant. It's in a beautiful part of Scotland, of northern Scotland, if you like. That climate, it's really beautiful. And their aims weren't that different. It was like work is love in action, which is very similar to our work as an offering. Co-creation with nature, so it's very similar to our alignment with ecology. Inner listening, of course, is overlapping with our emphasis on unity and also conflict resolution, like bringing people together. So their vision was quite similar. They were overlap. So these are the phases and the phases we need to go through. Basically, Auroville's already in the mature phase. That's 53 years later. The pioneer phase is basically going to establish a vision. This is very important with all the groups that I've worked with. You should be able to write your vision down, and your group should agree on the vision. This is what we all want together. And you should create guidelines. Like in Auroville, our guidelines are no drugs. And it doesn't mean that drugs are not happening. They do happen, but privately. They're just not part of the fabric or the ideas of the community. They're not in the public spaces. Of course, things like drugs, they will always happen everywhere, especially cannabis, which has got a quasi-legal status in South Africa and in India. For Shiva worship, it also does. But that's in our guidelines. So having the vision and the guidelines written down and clear, and then having the group that agrees to those visions and guidelines, and that's the premise of starting the community. That's very important. Your next step is to create your legal structures and also to see what are the most optimal structures. In Auroville, it's all a trust. It's a not-for-profit. It's actually a statutory body, but it's like a not-for-profit statutory body. And then we have commercial research and service projects under that, but it's all under one not-for-profit entity. So obviously, if you're going to be a company or trust, not-for-profit makes more sense because community is going to be a altruistic idea. It's not going to be a business. If it's a business, it's a golf estate, basically, or an old-age home. It's not a community, basically. So you have to decide which one you're going to be. There's many successful golf estates that you can go and buy into, and they have many elements of living community, but they're not communities, although they have overlaps with communities. And the next step is to gather people of goodwill that are aligned with this vision, the guidelines, and the structure. So once you've got your legal structure, once you've got your vision and your guidelines, you gather people, and that could also, there might be people out there who already want it, but they didn't know. So you have to find a way to reach out to people. In Auroville, we had that initial ceremony with people from 124 nations, seeding the community. So there already was some sort of message put out. If you have goodwill and you want to join a community of human unity, it was put out in the media at the time, come, So gather the people, because we are going to need people initially. Without people, you can't do a community. And then you create leadership teams. You need people to make decisions in different departments. So you have leadership teams and your groups that are going to make the decisions, and also teams for conflict resolution. You're going to have conflict from day one. If marriages have 66% failure rates in some countries, then you're going to have divorces, and you're going to have everything that's going to happen within your community. And you need the tools. You need tools, and you need mature, stable, intelligent tools to deal with conflict. And at that phase, you can start to create links with successful communities, and you create expert panels. So there's already so much expertise in South Africa, and we also have a lot in Auroville that I can put on the table. So we create panels of experts and mentors, people that can be there. They're not part of the community, but when we say we don't know how to structure something legally, we have a legal mentor pool. And when we don't understand which way to do something financially, we have a finance mentor pool. And when it's about organic farming, we have a permaculture and organic farming mentor pool. So you have to build up those, and there are people who would want to contribute but not be part of the community. We already have international advisory bodies that do that. And then, very important is to create your plans, your 1 and 5 year plans, and your teams. And this will cover things like land, food, housing, infrastructure, safety, economy, fundraising, commerce, education, health, outreach, energy, ecology, waste, volunteers, growth, that means growing the community and scaling it. And you should have a quarterly review. You should meet and look at how you're doing with all these 1 and 5 year plans. The planning part is important because it's not just one person going to live on a farm where you can just sort of say, okay, today I'll wake up and do this. You actually want to create a community. So a community needs certain components, basically. So the plans just allow you to structure your thoughts that are already there in your dream space and say, okay, this is what we need to make happen. And there should be consensus on the plans, that we all agree we're going to have a communal place to eat. That's, for example, as a plan. And then the next step is important. So look at the feasibility for the land use and the financial. So with Daniel now, we're actually in that phase now, which is looking at the zoning and can the land actually harbour a community. There's a land that we're looking at together now in Stanford. Is it feasible? So I'm busy speaking to people in the Western Cape government with zoning, so the Agri-1 zoning allows only so many housing. The resort zoning, I think, which you might have here, allows certain things, but they actually don't suit a community. We would be kind of fitting into something that's not designed. So do we work on a high level with the Western Cape municipality and create a new kind of zoning? Is there a zoning that's there that we can adopt? So we need a sub-panel on zoning. This is what we've identified for the feasibility, because otherwise it's infeasible. You're going to buy a farm, the government's going to say you can only have 3 houses there, and then you're going to start building houses and have problems. Or you'll do temporary accommodation, and some people will say, we're not happy with temporary, we want permanent. We don't want a container or a teepee. So the feasibility is very important. And then the next step is obtain your land, and then develop your master plans, your zones, and your development guidelines. So that's the next step. Once you've proven it's feasible, you've got your teams in place, you can basically buy the land. Because you've got a fundraising team, you've got a finance team. So you know if you can actually buy that land, because those teams are operational. Then the next phase I call growing up. This was Auroville in the sort of 1980s and 90s, and that's basically when you expand. So the pioneer phase is the most difficult phase. That's to start the fire, basically. It's the most difficult. But once you've done that, fortunately, it's like having a child. You've got the nappy phase, then you've got the toddler phase, and then you've got the young child, and then the young adult phase. So once it gets easier and easier for all of you who've had kids every year. So you expand your 1 and 5 year plans. You look into adopting more land. Now, let's say we got one farm to start here or one place. It's not going to be enough. You want to grow. You want to have more land because you want the community to adopt more space so we can have more people, more creativity. Unless you get a huge piece of land initially that's too big for you, which is possible, but I'm not saying impossible, but that might not be realistic to gather that amount of money to start with. So you might have to start with a single or 2 farms. Then you look in your growing up phase to adopt more land. You're doing regular reviews of your review of our 1 and 5 year goals in this growing up phase, and then we're deepening the fundraising, volunteership, and gift economy. It's much easier to fundraise in this growing up phase. When you're saying we're going to start a community, people go, well, how do I know it's going to succeed? But once we've already got a little school or a little training center, a little outreach, we can then go, and it's very easy to get donors on board because you can show people something concrete. It's like the first job syndrome. It's very difficult to get your first job with no resume. But once you've got your resume, which is your pioneer phase, there's the growing up phase. So you should, when you're doing your pioneer phase, you should be thinking ahead for your growing up phase. It shouldn't be something that you deal with 5 years down the line. You should be thinking, okay, in 5 years we're going to start thinking about these things. And you strengthen the community in that growing up phase. That's when you really strengthen your sustainability, your wholesome living for all, education, the development of the arts, culture and outreach. So you've rooted yourself, you've got a little sapling that's growing up, and you can start to think of the sort of outer layer things that you were not maybe thinking of in your pioneering phase. And then there's the mature phase where Auroville is in now, and that's where we're really deepening our outreach. We can share our expertise, like me coming here from Auroville and sharing. We can now help people, we can offer a lot. All of you can come and stay. We already have a place for you to stay. It's just arrive, you know, and we can feed you. So that's in the mature phase. And you want to start then duplicating your community, and you still have in your 5-year plans. And this is a very good time to start seeding new communities, basically to help other communities to start. It's a bit like growing up, becoming an adult, and then you have kids. So Auroville is at that phase of having a family now and having kids. They don't have to look like Auroville, even be officially linked to Auroville, because Auroville doesn't really have a body or an authority. There is no authority there. It's an anarchy with a divine alignment. So it's not like Auroville is going to come and do something in South Africa, but we can align it with communities like Auroville that are already successful, that have already walked the paths we need to walk, and then we can together walk these paths. Specific to the South African context, the two things that came up now with this work in Stanford is the zoning. We really have to get that right. We obviously can work beneath the zoning and do a community with temporary accommodation or do quasi-permanent accommodation. I've seen certain solutions and sort of think out of the box, but still we're taking an agri-zoning and fitting something on, and there's always risk that the municipality could come at some stage and say, we don't like this, this is not what you meant to do in this zone. But,
and did you have that problem in Auroville?
In Auroville we don't have the problem because it's zoned as a community. And we don't have to ask the government if we can build something. We go to our own zoning authority. We're basically autonomous with everything we build. So the only person who can say no is the community. We don't ask the Tamil Nadu municipality, can we build this building? We just build it. If our community approves it, we have a public participation process. Sometimes we don't build because people don't want to cut one tree. We have other problems that you don't have here. We've had buildings that got granted with millions of dollars that weren't built because one person didn't want one tree cut down and the building had to be moved somewhere else. That's happened in Auroville. So we have problems that you couldn't even dream of having here. But you know what, I show people that tree. There's even a road where the tree's in the middle of the road and there's just a barrier going around. And I show people the tree and I say, well, there's people who stood up for one tree, and that's a message for the world, you know. I mean, you know, every good has bad and every bad is good. Okay? The second one in South Africa is safety. So I would choose an area which is innately already quite safe. There are areas where there already is a lot of crime, and it's going to jeopardize the community because you're going to have a lot of open spaces. And there's going to be a pooling of a lot of resources there. So if it is a high crime area, you would have to fence it or protect it in a macro way, which might be too expensive or complicated. So the idea in South Africa is to look for places that already have protection, geographical protection, and also demographically they're already in a safer area, safer zone. Just say in Cape Town you have zones that are maybe more dangerous or more risky and some that are safer. So you have to think that before choosing your land. And now we'll just open a discussion on the next steps. And I'll just tell you briefly, that's my thank you slide of Auroville. Basically, I'm available, and also when I say I, also everyone in Auroville that is available to help to create a community in South Africa. The kibbutzes came when Israel was at war, and there was this need to unify for protection and safety, and I think South Africa mirrors that need of Israel at that time. A lot of people are seeing that their kids can't play freely, that their elderly can't move safely around, and I think besides the ecological, the spiritual, the higher aspects, I think communities are essential in South Africa right now. It's an essential need. And I think we need a movement, and we need to do it properly, have the right plan. I think taking the help from Auroville, which means the grassroots and all the people that we can connect with that have already done great work there and documented that, it would accelerate it, and I'm fully available, basically.